They called the cops because our lawn grass was 3 inches tall. That's not a joke, that's exactly how it began. A woman named Miley from the HOA reported us like we were criminals, all because she didn't like how our yard looked. She thought we'd just apologize, mow it down, and disappear. What she didn't know was we weren't the kind of family you push around, and definitely not the kind you spy on. What followed, it unraveled everything and nearly took the whole neighborhood with it. If you've ever had to deal with a nightmare neighbor, you'll want to stick around. Tell me in the comments if this sounds familiar. My family had just moved to Maple Grove Estates 3 weeks earlier, full of optimism about our fresh start in suburbia. You know the type of place. Perfect lawns maintained with military precision, matching mailboxes that look like they came from the same catalog, the whole suburban dream package wrapped up in a neat little bow. My wife Rachel and I thought it would be great for our kids, Tyler, who's 10 and full of energy, and Jake, who's 12, and getting into that phase where everything adults do is automatically suspect. Clean streets where kids could ride bikes safely, good schools with actual funding, the kind of neighborhood where the biggest problem would be deciding between vanilla or chocolate ice cream at the community barbecue. Looking back now, I should have known better. I should have recognized the warning signs. There's always someone in every community who takes things too far, who mistakes authority for a license to terrorize. And in Maple Grove Estates, that someone was Miley Miller. Miley Miller, HOA president, had an uncanny knack for making her presence known. She seemed to be everywhere, watching everything with a clipboard in hand. She had this way of looking at houses that made you feel like she was taking inventory, checking off boxes on some invisible scorecard. Her little white dog was just an excuse to patrol the neighborhood, gathering intelligence on residents who didn't even realize they were being watched. The first week was completely normal, almost suspiciously peaceful, in that way new neighborhoods can be. We unpacked boxes methodically, room by room. The kids explored the neighborhood with the excitement of discovering new territory. Rachel started her morning jogs along tree-lined streets that actually felt safe. I was focused on getting our home office set up, since we both work from home most of the time, a situation that requires careful coordination and absolute privacy for reasons I couldn't explain to curious neighbors. Everything seemed perfect in that artificial suburban way. The neighbors waved when they drove by in their spotless SUVs, kids played on the sidewalks, under the watchful eyes of stay-at-home parents. Sprinklers ran in the evenings with the regularity of clockwork. Then I got this formal letter in our mailbox, not hand-delivered, with a friendly smile, but wedged in there like a legal summons. Not a friendly welcome note from the community committee or an invitation to join the community pool. No, this was a violation notice about grass height regulations, complete with measurements, photographs, and legal language that made it sound like we'd committed a federal crime. 2 inches over regulation, it said, as if those 2 inches represented a threat to civilization itself. The letter was printed on official HOA letterhead, signed with a flourish, and came with a detailed explanation of community standards that read like a legal document. I figured I'd handle it over the weekend when I had time to actually look at the lawn, but work exploded that week, and I completely forgot about it. 3 days later, Rachel spots something that made both of us do a double take and question our sanity. "Honey, come see this," she called from the kitchen window, her voice carrying that tone that means something is seriously wrong with the world. I looked out the window and saw her crouch by the mailbox, measuring our grass with a tape like she was investigating a crime scene. She was wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt, like she was dressed for some kind of official inspection, complete with a clipboard and what looked like a professional camera for documentation. When she noticed us watching her through the window, she hurried to her white SUV and sped off like she'd been caught robbing a bank, tires actually squealing on the asphalt. I mean, who does that? Who measures someone else's grass with professional equipment in broad daylight? Rachel and I just stared at each other in stunned silence. "Was that real?" she asked, and I realized we were both questioning what we'd just witnessed. Was I overreacting? Or was something truly off about this whole situation? Normal people don't carry measuring devices around the neighborhood like weapons. Normal HOA presidents don't crouch in people's yards taking precise measurements of vegetation, like they're gathering evidence for a criminal prosecution. The whole thing felt like performance art, except it was happening in real life and targeting my family specifically. The next morning, a notice was stuck to our door. This one felt different, cold, demanding. It wasn't a welcome message, it was a warning. Final warning, Violation number 2847, signed by Miley Miller, HOA president, with a flourish that suggested she took genuine pleasure in her authority. A $200 fine was attached with paperwork that looked more complex than my mortgage documents, for grass that had grown during a week of solid rain that we couldn't control. The violation number caught my attention immediately, 2847. How many violations had this woman issued? Was she running some kind of citation factory? I started keeping a simple log after that, documenting every interaction, every letter, every strange encounter. Date time, what happened, witnesses present. It's a habit from work. I guess this compulsive need to document everything, because you never know when you'll need to present evidence. At the time, I thought I was being paranoid, maybe overreacting to what could be standard suburban bureaucracy. Maybe I should have just paid the fine and moved on, kept my head down and blended in. I don't know. But something about the aggressive tone in that letter made me want to understand what we were dealing with. The language was unnecessarily harsh, almost threatening, like she was trying to establish dominance rather than maintain community standards. This wasn't a friendly reminder about property maintenance. This was a declaration of war disguised as administrative procedure. Tyler came home from school that Tuesday with news that made my blood run cold and confirmed my worst suspicions about what we were dealing with. Tyler came home, his face pale. "Dad, there's a lady asking about us, about our schedules, our cars. She's been asking everyone." My stomach dropped. Work schedules, vehicle information for a grass violation. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with an overzealous HOA president who just cared too much about property values. We were dealing with someone who was conducting systematic surveillance on my family, gathering intelligence like we were suspects in some kind of criminal investigation. What possible reason could there be for asking about our daily routines, unless she was planning something that required knowing when we'd be home or away? Thursday brought letter number 3, escalating the language even further, now threatening legal action and forced compliance measures, with a timeline that suggested she'd done this before. The language was getting aggressive, almost militant in its precision. This wasn't normal HOA stuff anymore. This was something else entirely, something that felt organized and predatory. The escalation was too fast, too systematic, too professional. Most neighborhood disputes take months to reach this level of intensity, but Miley was moving at the speed of someone following a predetermined playbook. Rachel sat across from me studying the letters in silence. I could tell she was already piecing together a bigger picture. She's always been good at spotting patterns, seeing things that don't add up. "She's escalating awfully fast," Rachel said, studying the official language and formatting. "Most HOA disputes take months to reach this level. This feels professional, like she's done this before." The letters were perfectly formatted, legally precise, systematically numbered. Someone had experience with this process. I joked that maybe Miley was just really passionate about lawn maintenance, but even as I said it, I knew that wasn't the case. This woman was running some kind of operation, and for whatever reason she'd decided to target my family. The question was, why us? We were new, quiet, kept to ourselves. What made us special? Jake added another disturbing detail during dinner that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A younger neighbor mentioned that the lady with the clipboard has been taking pictures of our house. Different times of day, different angles, always from the street, but sometimes from the park across the way. Pictures, she told him she was documenting violations for official records, but he said it looked more like surveillance photos. Official records. That phrase stuck with me like a warning bell. What kind of official records required photographic surveillance of a family's daily routine? Why would lawn maintenance violations need documentation that looked like evidence gathering for a criminal case? Rachel and I exchanged looks across the dinner table, both of us recognizing that this was beyond normal HOA enforcement. This was harassment with a systematic approach conducted by someone who clearly had experience in intimidation and control. Friday evening, the community bulletin board got a new posting that made my stomach drop and confirmed that Miley was escalating this conflict to a public level. Emergency HOA meeting, addressing dangerous precedents. Dangerous precedents over grass height. The language was deliberately inflammatory, designed to make our family sound like a threat to community safety. I stared at that notice, reading it multiple times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding, and something in my gut told me we'd just stepped into quicksand disguised as a neighborhood dispute. That's when I realized we weren't just dealing with an overzealous HOA president. This woman was watching us, tracking every move. The community center felt like a courtroom when we walked in Thursday night, complete with the oppressive atmosphere of judgment and condemnation. Miley had set up a full presentation system that would make corporate executives jealous. Projector microphone easel with poster boards, even a laser pointer for emphasis. She was wearing a business suit, like she was prosecuting a federal case, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look like a prosecutor from a legal drama. I'm not even sure why she needed a microphone for 30 people, but there she was testing the sound levels like she was about to deliver the State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress. The room was arranged with chairs in rows facing her presentation area, and she'd positioned herself behind a podium like a prosecutor addressing a jury about to deliver a death sentence. 30 confused neighbors filed in, most looking genuinely puzzled about why they were spending their Thursday night discussing grass problems when they could be home watching television or helping kids with homework. An elderly neighbor kept checking her watch like she had somewhere more important to be. A young neighbor looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, including a root canal appointment. The whole setup felt deliberately intimidating, designed to make anyone who disagreed with Miley feel isolated and outnumbered. Miley launched into what can only be described as a prosecution opening statement worthy of a Supreme Court case. Ladies and gentlemen, we face a crisis that threatens the very foundation of our community, the bedrock principles that make Maple Grove Estates the premier neighborhood in this entire region. A crisis really over lawn maintenance. She clicked to aerial photos of our neighborhood somehow obtained from the city planning office through channels that probably cost taxpayer money. Our house was circled in red marker like a crime scene, highlighted and annotated like evidence in a murder trial. Property values depend on standards. Standards depend on compliance. Compliance depends on consequences. She paused dramatically between each sentence, letting the words sink in like she was delivering the Gettysburg Address. She wasn't talking about lawn care anymore. She was talking about control, about establishing a hierarchy where she sat at the top, making decisions about other people's lives. The way she emphasized each word, the systematic approach to her presentation, the professional quality of her visual aids. This woman had done this before, probably multiple times in multiple communities. Her PowerPoint slides were professionally designed, with graphics and charts, her talking points memorized and rehearsed, her visual aids strategically chosen for maximum psychological impact. This wasn't a spontaneous community meeting called by a concerned neighbor. This was a calculated campaign designed to isolate and destroy anyone who dared to challenge her authority. Her slideshow continued with photos of our house from multiple angles, comparison charts showing our grass versus neighbors with scientific precision, even a timeline of our violations with timestamps that suggested round-the-clock surveillance. The level of surveillance was disturbing beyond anything I'd experienced in my professional life. I mean, she had photos taken from different positions around our property at various times of day, including early morning shots that meant she'd been up before dawn, documenting our supposed crimes against suburban aesthetics. Some photos were taken from the street with telephoto lenses, others from the park across the way with professional equipment. A few looked like they were shot from neighboring properties with their permission or cooperation. The timestamps showed she'd been documenting our house for weeks, possibly since the day we'd moved in, treating our family like subjects in some kind of sociological experiment. How long had she been watching us? How many hours had she spent crouched in bushes or parked in her SUV taking pictures of our daily routines? An elderly neighbor shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly disturbed by the obsessive nature of Miley's documentation. Miley, this seems excessive for lawn issues. This looks more like stalking than community standards enforcement. Thank God someone said it out loud, because I was starting to wonder if I was the only one who saw how insane this all was. When she spoke again, her voice was colder. Her smile, once confident now, felt calculated. I realized she wasn't just an overbearing neighbor, she was a predator. Your property value has increased 18% since I implemented these standards. Do you want to see that disappear because we allow dangerous precedents to take root? The threat was crystal clear and delivered with the precision of someone who had made similar threats before. Comply, or your investment suffers. Submit or face financial consequences. A young neighbor raised his hand tentatively like a student afraid to question the teacher. What's the actual difference we're talking about? Like measurements. Miley displayed a ruler photo showing the precise measurements with the attention to detail of a forensic investigator. 3.2 inches versus regulation 2.5 inches. In landscaping, precision matters more than people realize. Chaos begins with small compromises. Murmurs started around the room as people began to grasp the obsessive nature of her enforcement. People were finally realizing she had measured our grass with precision instruments, probably multiple times throughout the week, to ensure accuracy, multiple times. This wasn't casual observation by a concerned neighbor. This was systematic documentation by someone with way too much time and an unhealthy obsession with control. The photo showed her measuring tape against individual grass blades taken from multiple angles to prove her point beyond any reasonable doubt, annotated with precise measurements and timestamps like evidence in a criminal trial. I propose increasing penalties to $1,000 for repeat violations. Miley announced with the authority of someone announcing new tax policy, plus mandatory weekly inspections for non-compliant properties conducted by certified professionals at the property owner's expense. Now the room buzzed with real concern and barely contained outrage. $1,000 weekly inspections of private property. Several neighbors exchanged worried glances, suddenly realizing they could be next on Miley's target list. This wasn't about maintaining community standards anymore. This was about establishing absolute authority over every aspect of neighborhood life, turning the HOA into a miniature police state where Miley held all the power and everyone else lived in fear of arbitrary punishment. Another longtime resident spoke up with the courage of someone who'd finally had enough. Miley isn't there. A process for these things, warnings committee reviews, appeals, procedures, this feels like we're skipping several steps in due process. But Miley dismissed the question with a wave of her hand, like she was swatting away an annoying insect. The process is what's failed us. Look at this situation. She gestured dramatically toward a blown-up photo of our house that made it look like a crime scene. 3 violations escalating defiance. Now they're conducting counter-surveillance on law. Abiding neighbors who are just trying to maintain community standards. Counter-surveillance. What was she talking about? I realized she'd seen me documenting her behavior and interpreted it as some kind of coordinated attack on her authority. The paranoia in her voice was unmistakable and growing stronger with each accusation. She genuinely believed we were running some kind of operation against her, when all we'd done was keep records of her harassment like any reasonable person would do when faced with systematic intimidation. The level of projection was staggering. She was accusing us of the exact behavior she'd been engaging in for weeks, turning reality upside down to make herself the victim in a situation where she was clearly the aggressor. The room was getting uncomfortable now, with neighbors shifting in their seats and exchanging glances that suggested they were starting to see Miley in a new light. Her mask was slipping, revealing the paranoid control freak underneath the professional facade. When it was my turn to respond, I stood calmly and kept my voice level, refusing to give her the confrontation she was clearly hoping for. We appreciate the community's attention to property maintenance. We'll address the height issue this weekend. Simple, direct, no confrontation, no drama, no ammunition for her to use against us later. I could see Miley's face fall slightly, her expression shifting from anticipation to disappointment. She'd clearly expected an argument, a heated exchange, a scene she could use to portray us as difficult troublemakers who didn't respect community standards. Instead, we gave her nothing to work with, no emotional outbursts she could point to as evidence of our supposed defiance. But as we were leaving, weaving through clusters of neighbors who were murmuring among themselves about what they'd just witnessed, I overheard her whispering to a man in a gray suit by the exit. As we left, I overheard her talking to a man in a gray suit, his voice low and urgent. "We need to escalate. They're not who they say they are." I froze. This was no longer just about grass height. Phase 2. What the hell was Phase 1? This woman was running an actual operation against neighborhood families, treating suburban homeowners like enemy combatants in some kind of undeclared war. The man nodded and made notes in a small black book, his demeanor professional and practiced. Who was he? What kind of HOA president has associates taking orders about surveillance and background checks? What kind of community organization requires operatives who look more like private investigators than volunteers? This was way beyond normal neighborhood politics. This was organized, systematic, and frankly disturbing in its serene and intensity. Walking home under the streetlights, Jake asked the question that had been bothering me all evening. Why does she hate us so much? We just moved here. Before I could come up with an answer that wouldn't scare a 12-year-old, Rachel grabbed my arm and pointed toward our house. Our house was completely dark, but there was a figure with a flashlight moving around in our backyard, systematically checking our fence line, measuring our garden borders, documenting everything with what looked like professional equipment. Someone was in our yard, and I realized Miley Miller had just declared war on the wrong family. The figure in our backyard turned out to be Miley herself, measuring our fence height with a construction level at 9:30 at night. When we confronted her with flashlights of our own, she claimed she was conducting routine compliance checking, but couldn't produce any HOA authorization for entering private property after dark. "Ma'am, this is trespassing," Rachel stated firmly. I could hear the edge in her voice that meant she was done playing games. Miley retreated toward the street, but not before announcing, "I'll find something. There's always something. Always something." How many families had she done this to? The certainty in her voice suggested this wasn't her first rodeo. She'd systematically targeted other families before us found their weak spots, exploited whatever vulnerabilities she could discover. That's when I realized we needed to stop playing defense and start gathering our own intelligence. It was time to stop reacting. I had a plan to turn the tables on Miley, make her think she had the upper hand, then strike when she least expected it. Time for our own investigation, but instead of amateur detective work, we decided to use systematic intelligence gathering. Rachel started jogging different routes through the neighborhood, mapping the social network, and building relationships naturally. She's always been good with people, and joggers tend to chat with other joggers, dog walkers, gardeners. She never directly asked about Miley, just listened and remembered everything. The key was patience, letting people volunteer information when they felt comfortable. I volunteered for weekend community projects, helping seniors with yard work, coaching kids soccer with Jake. People talk when they're comfortable, and I'm a good listener. It's amazing what you learn when you're just present and paying attention. Within a week, we had a clearer picture of the neighborhood dynamics than most residents who'd lived here for years. Tyler and Jake unknowingly became our eyes and ears, picking up bits of information from neighbors and classmates. They didn't realize how crucial their observations were. Kids hear everything adults think they don't notice, and they report back during family dinners with the kind of detail that would make professional investigators jealous. A longtime resident said Miley made a previous family move away. Another neighbor thinks Miley gets kickbacks from the maintenance company. One family pays extra fines because they're scared of her. The boys didn't understand the significance of what they were reporting, but Rachel and I recognized the pattern immediately. Within 2 weeks, we had a complete picture of Miley's operation, and it was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. This was systematic extortion with a neighborhood-wide scope. A longtime resident revealed that Miley had arrived 3 years ago, immediately ran for HOA president, unopposed, then systematically targeted specific families with escalating harassment until they sold their houses below market value. The timing was always the same. New families would move in, enjoy a brief honeymoon period, then suddenly find themselves facing escalating violations, fines, and harassment. Another neighbor mentioned that previous residents who'd lived in our house before us got similar treatment. Escalating fines, harassment, constant violations until they moved out in frustration after 18 months. One family admitted they'd been paying Miley's inflated fines quietly because it's easier than fighting and we can't afford to move. Pattern recognition was kicking in. Miley identifies target families, escalates harassment, systematically forces them out, somehow benefits from their departure. But how Tyler discovered something crucial during a school project that made everything click into place. Dad, I was researching property records for social studies class. Miley's brother owns a real estate company, and they bought all 3 houses from families who moved away from our street. Family real estate connections, property acquisition below market value, systematic harassment to force sales. The pieces were falling into place, but the scope was bigger than I'd imagined. Jake added another piece to the puzzle. The maintenance company that gets all our HOA contracts, Miller Property Services. Same last name as Miley. Financial fraud through shell companies. Money flowing from HOA fees directly to Miley's family businesses. She was running a full-scale operation using the HOA as a front for systematic property fraud and money laundering. But the smoking gun came from Rachel's morning run conversation with an elderly man who'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone. That woman reminds me of someone from my old neighborhood in Phoenix. Had a similar setup there before some kind of investigation shut her down and she disappeared overnight. Phoenix. Investigation. Sudden departure. I spent that evening researching Phoenix HOA scandals from 3 to 4 years ago, and there it was. Miley Miller, former president of Desert Vista HOA, under investigation for embezzlement and property fraud when she suddenly relocated to our state. She's done this before. She's a professional HOA scammer who moves cities when investigations get too close. The newspaper articles detailed a sophisticated operation involving property manipulation, financial fraud, and systematic harassment of targeted families. The methods were identical to what we were experiencing. The research revealed Miley's complete criminal history. 4 different cities, 4 different HOA scams, millions of dollars in fraudulent transactions. Each time she'd establish control target families, force them out, profit from their desperation, then disappear when law enforcement got close. She was like a locust moving from community to community, consuming everything valuable, then moving on. But Miley Miller had made one critical error in judgment. She was running the same playbook on federal agents who specialize in financial crimes. Looking at Miley's criminal history spread across my desk that night, I realized we weren't her first victims, but if I had anything to say about it, we might be her last. Monday morning, Miley escalated beyond neighborhood politics into something that would change everything. I was working from my home office when squad cars arrived. No sirens, but full-light bars flashing, creating a spectacle that drew neighbors from their houses to watch the drama unfold. Through the window, I could see 2 officers and Miley standing beside them, pointing at our house like she was directing a raid. She was animated, gesturing wildly, clearly trying to convince the officers that we pose some kind of immediate threat to the community. Seriously, she'd called the police time to get serious. I retrieved our home emergency kit from the bedroom safe. Federal Credentials Field Office, contact numbers, documentation, protocols. Rachel did the same from her office. If Miley Miller wanted to involve law enforcement, she was about to learn why that was a catastrophic mistake. The officers who approached were seasoned professionals, not rookie patrol officers. They knew how to read situations, which meant they'd probably already assessed that Miley was more problem than solution. Their body language suggested they were here reluctantly going through the motions to satisfy a persistent complainant rather than responding to a genuine emergency. Mr. Henderson, we received reports of possible domestic disturbance and suspicious activity at this address. Domestic disturbance. I looked back at my house where Rachel was calmly working at her computer and the boys were doing homework at the kitchen table. The scene was about as peaceful as suburban life gets. Officers, my family's been working quietly from home all morning. What kind of disturbance are we talking about? Miley immediately interjected. They have people coming and going at strange hours, loud conversations, and they refuse to comply with basic community standards. Strange hours. Officers, she's referring to grocery deliveries and conference calls. I could see the lead officer studying Miley with obvious skepticism. His partner was taking notes, but his body language suggested he was documenting Miley's behavior more than ours. They'd clearly dealt with problem residents before people who use police resources to fight personal battles. Ma'am, what specific laws do you believe are being violated here? The second officer asked carefully. They're deliberately defying authority. Their grass is still too long, and now they're conducting surveillance on neighbors. Surveillance. I realized she had seen me documenting her behavior and interpreted it as some kind of attack. That's when I knew she was operating from a position of guilt and paranoia. Innocent people don't assume documentation equals attack. Guilty people do. Ma'am, the lead officer said with the patient tone cops use for difficult people, HOA violations aren't criminal matters unless they involve actual property damage or safety hazards. But Miley wasn't backing down. What about their strange work situation? They claim to work from home but get official-looking mail and have secure phone conversations. She'd been monitoring our mail delivery and trying to eavesdrop on our phone calls. This was criminal stalking behavior, and she'd just admitted it to 2 police officers. I couldn't believe she was actually helping us build a case against her. The officers exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that Miley had just confessed to federal crimes. Monitoring mail, attempting to intercept communications, conducting surveillance on private citizens. Each admission made their job easier and our case stronger. Officers, I said, producing my documentation folder. I'd like to report systematic harassment by Miley Miller, including trespassing mail monitoring and attempted surveillance of private communications. The lead officer reviewed my timeline carefully. Dates, photos, witness statements, everything organized and professional. His expression grew increasingly serious as he flipped through the evidence. This wasn't some neighbor dispute over property lines. This was systematic criminal harassment with federal implications. Mrs. Miller taking photographs of private property without consent and monitoring someone's mail could constitute stalking under state law. Miley's confident facade cracked for the first time. Miley's smile faded into something far colder. Her eyes, once sweet now, felt calculating, as if she was watching us like prey. I'm protecting this community. I have every right to enforce standards. But the officers weren't buying it anymore. They'd seen enough evidence to know who the real problem was. You have the right to file complaints through proper channels, the lead officer replied firmly. You don't have the right to conduct surveillance or trespass on private property. The officers prepared to leave, but the lead officer paused, glancing at the federal parking permits visible through our garage window. His eyes met mine briefly, professional recognition passing between law enforcement officers. He knew. Not everything, but enough to understand we weren't ordinary suburban residents. Mr. Henderson, if you continue experiencing harassment, don't hesitate to contact us directly. After they left, Miley stood in our driveway, humiliated and furious. The neighbors who had gathered to watch were murmuring among themselves, clearly seeing her in a new light. You think you've won? I have connections in this city that go way higher than local police. What kind of connections was she talking about? Miley. Rachel stepped outside. What exactly are you threatening? But Miley was already walking away, phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapidly to someone in hushed, urgent tones. Her voice carried enough for us to catch fragments. They're not what they seem. Need immediate action, higher-level response. I became obsessed with documenting every move, every word. The logbook was no longer just a record. It was my way of regaining control. That evening, I noticed the surveillance car that had been occasionally parked on our street was replaced by a different vehicle. Black sedan, tinted windows, definitely not neighborhood residents. Professional surveillance, the kind that requires resources and authorization. Miley's connections were real, and they were taking an active interest in our family. Tyler came home with a look of shock on his face. Dad, Miley's been asking about us again. But this time, she was asking questions about our work schedules. My stomach dropped. The black sedan confirmed our worst suspicions. Miley's connections were real and potentially dangerous, which meant we needed to stop playing suburban detective and activate professional resources immediately. I made a secure call to our field office first thing Tuesday morning. This is Agent Henderson, badge 7492. I need a complete background workup on Miley Miller Phoenix to current location focus on financial crimes and property fraud. Within 6 hours, we had Miley's complete criminal profile delivered through encrypted channels, and the scope was staggering. Phoenix wasn't her first operation. She'd been running HOA scams across 4 states over 8 years, leaving a trail of victimized families and financial devastation wherever she went. I wasn't going to just sit back and wait anymore. I'd learned enough to know how Miley operated. Now it was time to outplay her strategically, methodically. The pattern was identical in every location. Establish HOA control through unopposed elections, target specific families for systematic harassment, force below-market sales to connected buyers, launder proceeds through fake maintenance contracts and inflated service fees. But Phoenix was different because she got sloppy left evidence trails and had to flee when a retired detective started building a federal case. Rachel contacted him now, working as a private investigator, still tracking Miley's network. His information during our encrypted call was invaluable and terrifying. She's not working alone, he explained. There's a whole organization, property buyers, maintenance companies, even corrupted local officials who smooth the regulatory processes. The scope was national, with connections reaching into legitimate businesses and government offices. The scale was massive beyond anything we'd imagined. Conservative estimates suggested $2 million in fraudulent transactions across multiple cities, with dozens of families victimized and several communities financially devastated. Why hasn't she been arrested? Rachel asked the question I'd been wondering. Shell companies, jurisdictional complications, and she never stays in one place long enough for prosecutors to build airtight cases, the retired detective replied. But if you can get her on federal charges like mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit racketeering, she's done. The whole network goes down. Our neighborhood investigation suddenly took on new urgency. We needed evidence of federal crimes, not just local harassment and trespassing. The stakes were higher than we had realized. Tyler and Jake had no idea they were becoming our greatest assets, but with every new piece of information, we were closing in on Miley's operation. Tyler provided our breakthrough during dinner conversation Wednesday night. "Dad, I saw Miley meeting with some guys at the park yesterday after school. They gave her a big envelope and she gave them something back. Physical exchange of materials between co-conspirators. Potential evidence of ongoing conspiracy. I set up legitimate surveillance equipment that night, professionally grade but legally installed on our own property. If Miley was meeting with criminal associates in public spaces, we'd record everything with admissible quality. The equipment was sophisticated enough to capture clear audio and video from significant distances, all while remaining completely legal since it was monitoring public spaces from private property. Meanwhile, Rachel developed financial intelligence on the HOA accounts, maintenance company invoices, property transfer documents. The money trail was becoming crystal clear. Every new piece of evidence felt like a step closer to something bigger. But as I gathered it all, a part of me feared what I might uncover about Miley's true intentions. The smoking gun came from Jake's computer skills and natural curiosity. "Dad, I found something weird while researching for my economics project. Miller Property Services has the same business license number as 3 other companies in different states. Isn't that illegal? Same criminal organization, different names operating across state lines. Federal jurisdiction confirmed beyond any doubt. The business records showed a sophisticated network of shell companies, all ultimately controlled by the same people, all designed to launder money and hide assets." That night, we documented Miley meeting with 2 men at the community park. Our equipment captured clear audio of their conversation. "The Henderson situation is getting out of control. They're asking too many questions, and people are starting to listen. Can your police contacts shut them down?" "I tried, but they're clean. Too clean. I think they might be law enforcement." Bingo. Miley suspected our real identity, which meant she was about to either run or escalate to something dangerous. Her voice carried a note of genuine fear that we hadn't heard before. She was losing control of the situation, and desperate criminals make unpredictable moves. The more we fought back, the more frantic Miley became. Her carefully maintained composure was slipping, and I could see it in every interaction. "We need to move the operation," the second voice said. "Transfer funds, close accounts disappear before they build a case we can't fight." They were planning to flee within days, maybe hours. We had one chance to end Miley's 8-year crime spree, but only if we could set the perfect trap. The conversation revealed the full scope of their operation, the timeline for their planned escape, and most importantly, their fear that we represented a genuine threat to their entire network. Miley wasn't just calling in the HOA board anymore. She had someone else involved now. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something far worse. I found something that night, a document that connected Miley to something far darker than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about lawn violations anymore. Miley suspected we were law enforcement, which made her dangerous, but also predictable in ways she didn't realize. Cornered criminals make desperate moves that expose their entire operation, and we were going to use that desperation against her. We designed a scenario that would force her to contact every member of her network while creating irrefutable evidence of federal crimes. Phase 1 was making her believe we were building a major case. I started working openly in our garage, setting up equipment that looked like a federal surveillance operation. Computer monitors, radio equipment, file cabinets, all legitimate home office gear, arranged to suggest something much bigger was happening. Jake casually mentioned at the school bus stop. "My dad's been getting lots of important phone calls lately. Something about investigations and evidence." Within hours, Miley was parked across the street, photographing our house with telephoto lenses. She was gathering intelligence on what she thought was a federal task force preparing to move against her network. Her surveillance was obvious, almost desperate, suggesting she was operating from a position of fear rather than confidence. Phase 2 was forcing network contact through manufactured urgency. Rachel spread word through neighborhood channels that The Henderson family seems to be preparing for something big this weekend. Official visitors to a suspected federal operation would terrify any criminal network into immediate action. Miley took the bait faster than we'd anticipated. Our surveillance captured her, making frantic phone calls from her front yard within the hour. Call 1 to an unknown number. They're federal agents. I need extraction protocols activated immediately. Call 2 to a different contact. Transfer all funds to backup accounts. Shut down Miller Property Services by Friday. Call 3 to someone she called the boss, and this one made my blood run cold. If they're building a case, we need to eliminate the problem permanently before they can testify. Eliminate the problem. Death threat against federal agents recorded in high definition, with timestamps and audio analysis ready for court. She'd just provided us with everything we needed to bring down her entire network. But Miley wasn't finished with her self-destruction. She called an emergency HOA meeting for that evening agenda listed as Addressing Dangerous Criminal Elements in Our Community. She was going to publicly accuse us of being federal agents while surrounded by neighbors creating witnesses to her knowledge of our real identity. Perfect. She was building our entire case for us while thinking she was protecting herself. I was running on fumes. Every letter, every cold stare from the neighbors chipped away at me. But when I looked at Rachel and the boys I knew, giving up wasn't an option. The meeting that night was packed with confused neighbors. Miley had brought visual aids like a courtroom presentation, telephoto photos of our house, speculation about our suspicious activities, even a timeline of federal cases in other cities that she claimed matched our arrival pattern. Ladies and gentlemen, Miley announced with the confidence of someone who thought she held all the cards, the Henderson family are not who they claim to be. Gasps around the room. An elderly neighbor looked shocked. A young neighbor appeared genuinely confused about why this mattered. Furthermore, Miley continued, I have evidence they're targeting law-abiding citizens for harassment using false pretenses. She was accusing federal agents of civil rights violations while simultaneously revealing she'd investigated our background through illegal channels. Tyler raised his hand with perfect innocent timing. Miley, how do you know so much about federal agents and investigations? Brilliant kid. Miley realized too late that she'd exposed expertise in areas no legitimate HOA president should understand. Important people who keep our community safe from government overreach. The room was watching Miley paint herself into a corner with every answer. Safe from what exactly? I asked. Are you saying our neighborhood is under some kind of federal threat? People we used to wave to now close their blinds. I heard whispers when I walked the dog. Miley had weaponized the neighborhood and we were her targets. She was spiraling, her carefully planned presentation falling apart as she realized she'd walked into a trap. This had stopped being about rules a long time ago. Miley was trying to destroy us piece by piece, so I changed tactics. I started thinking like her. She abandoned the meeting abruptly. This community will thank me when the truth comes out, but the truth was already out. Our recording equipment had captured everything, and our backup team had been monitoring from unmarked vehicles positioned around the community center. The neighbors were murmuring among themselves, clearly seeing Miley in a new light. Rachel wasn't just holding the house together, she was holding me together. She tracked records, organized our case files, and reminded me why we were doing this. I reached out to someone who owed me a favor, a lawyer with a reputation for flipping HOA boards inside out. As Miley stormed out, I knew tomorrow would bring either her arrest or her final desperate attack on my family. The pressure was getting to her, and desperate people do desperate things. Walking home that night, I felt the weight of everything we'd uncovered, everything we'd documented, everything we were about to unleash. The neighborhood felt different now, charged with tension, like the calm before a storm. Rachel took my hand as we walked up our driveway, both of us knowing that whatever happened next would determine not just our future in this community, but possibly our safety. The next morning, we found our answer. That night, someone dumped a bucket of red paint across our driveway. In the middle of it, spelled in shaky block letters, was one word: enough. That's when I knew Miley was slipping. Miley made her last stand at 4 a.m. Friday, and it was exactly the kind of desperate move we'd been expecting. Our security system woke us with alerts to movement in the backyard. Through night vision cameras, we watched Miley and 2 men approaching our house with what appeared to be gasoline containers and ignition devices. They were planning arson, destroying evidence while eliminating witnesses in one move. I activated emergency protocols while Rachel coordinated with backup teams already positioned around the neighborhood. Within 3 minutes, federal response units had surrounded our property with tactical precision. Miley had just escalated from financial fraud to attempted murder of federal agents. Miley and her accomplices were caught red-handed with accelerant and timing devices. Attempted arson of a federal agent's residence while the family was inside. Multiple felonies carrying life sentences. But we let them make one final mistake before moving in. As dawn broke, the entire neighborhood gathered to watch the arrests drawn by the commotion and flashing lights. News crews arrived within the hour, alerted by reports of a major HOA scandal involving federal agents. The scene was chaotic, but controlled with federal agents in tactical gear securing evidence, while local police managed the crowd of stunned neighbors. Miley in handcuffs and facing federal charges made one last desperate play for sympathy. These people are government agents who infiltrated our community illegally. They're the real criminals here. Perfect. She just publicly admitted to knowing our real identity while under arrest for attempting to murder us. I stepped forward, federal credentials clearly visible in the morning light. Special Agent Owen Henderson, Homeland Security, Financial Crimes Division. The crowd erupted in amazement and confusion. Rachel joined me. Special Agent Rachel Henderson, same division. Miley's face showed pure disbelief, then rage, then the desperate calculation of someone realizing they'd been outplayed at every step. I uploaded the HOA violation letters, the footage of her on our lawn, the whispering meetings into one tight video. Title, When the HOA President Thinks She Owns You. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed our neighbors and the news cameras. For the past 6 months, we've been conducting an undercover investigation into a multi-state financial fraud operation using HOA corruption to launder criminal proceeds. An elderly neighbor gasped, "You mean all those maintenance contracts were fraudulent?" Yes. Miley Miller has been running this scam across 4 states for 8 years, stealing approximately $2.5 million from HOA communities just like ours. The arrests continued throughout the morning. Miley's entire network, property buyers, maintenance company, operators, corrupted local officials, all swept up in coordinated raids across 3 states. The scope of the operation was finally visible, with evidence boxes being loaded into federal vehicles and suspects being processed at multiple locations. The retired detective arrived from Phoenix specifically to witness Miley's final arrest. 8 years, he told the news cameras with obvious satisfaction. 8 years we've been chasing this organization. Miley being loaded into federal transport made one last threat that sealed her fate. You'll never stop all of us. This network is bigger than you know. Actually, Rachel replied calmly for the cameras. We already have. 18 arrests, 4 states complete, financial records recovered. Your network is finished. The room was packed. I walked in with a folder and a flash drive. When the projector lit up and the first clip played, Miley screaming at a neighbor over mailbox color gasps filled the room. Miley Miller received 25 years federal prison for fraud money, laundering, conspiracy, and attempted murder of federal agents. Her accomplices got sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. The prosecuting attorney called it one of the most sophisticated HOA fraud cases in federal history. HOA fund recovery meant residents received full restitution, totaling $67,000. An elderly neighbor became the new HOA president, implementing transparent financial oversight and reasonable maintenance standards. Our cover story held perfectly. Neighbors viewed us as heroes who had sacrificed normal suburban life to protect communities from financial predators. Miley stammered. She reached for her notes, but her voice shook. Someone in the back muttered, "Enough of this." And just like that, the room turned. Tyler and Jake became local celebrities when the story broke nationally as the kids who helped catch criminals. Our house remained our home. The kids love their schools. Rachel enjoys morning runs without surveillance. And I've perfected the art of maintaining grass at exactly 2.5 inches. Sometimes I catch myself measuring it just to smile at the memory. The vegetable garden that had spelled smile got replanted to spell justice. Visible from Miley's old house, currently for sale at fair market value, to a lovely family with normal height grass and no criminal enterprises. 6 months later, Rachel and I received the Attorney General's Award for Excellence in Financial Crimes Investigation. Sometimes justice comes through high-speed chases and dramatic raids, but sometimes it comes through patient investigation, triggered by complaints about grass height. Miley Miller thought she was targeting another vulnerable family to exploit. Instead, she chose federal agents who specialized in exactly the crimes she was committing. Bad choice, Miley. Very bad choice. Funny thing, the grass still grows, the mailbox is still crooked, and we're still here. Miley last. I heard she moved 3 neighborhoods over, hopefully somewhere with fewer cameras. But 2 weeks ago, we got another letter, anonymous this time. Compliance check pending. Rachel thinks it's a prank. I'm not so sure. And honestly, I don't know if it even matters. Whether it's Miley or someone else, there's always going to be another clipboard, another rule, another person who thinks they can control what doesn't belong to them. But now we've got eyes open, records saved, and neighbors who finally started asking the right questions. Justice didn't come loud. It came slow, steady, and public. Maybe the real lesson here is sometimes the best revenge is just being too prepared to be messed with. If you've ever had to outsmart someone who crossed the line, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And hey, if you like this one and want to support the channel, you can always hit that little thanks button down below. Thanks for hanging out.
You watched it. You felt it. Now share it with someone who loves drama even more than you. That's the QA Stories way.